Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Stella Jones and I'm the Director of Townend Research School based up in Sunderland in the northeast of England. Today we're going to be taking a bit of a magical mystery tour of the brain, emotions, a bit of cognitive science chucked in there as well, and then we're going to be looking at mainly how self-regulation can unlock learning. So as educators, our core purpose, that unwavering North Star is learning, is all pupils thriving and achieving. So in fact, it's about all adults thriving and achieving too. So just during this session, if I say teachers, because that's just my habit, I do mean educators, and that term applies to parents too, because I know we had a few parents signing up. And then when I say pupils, please replace it with children, teens, adults, basically any human, because it's relevant to all. The human brain is the human brain after all. So we're going to look at how managing emotions and behaviour is key to helping us focus, think, communicate, and learn. It's basically the key to thriving and achieving. And I think we often talk about self-regulation, but we don't really understand the biology behind it. So there's a bit of a science lesson here as well. So we are a research school and part of the Research Schools Network, which there are 33 of across England, as you can see from that infographic there. So I'm sure there'll be not one far from where you are. So please do reach out to them and see what they have on offer. So the role of the network is to provide on-the-ground support to settings to make better use of evidence to inform teaching and learning and to make a difference in the classroom, especially for those settings that serve communities with high levels of socio-economic disadvantage. So our job as a research school is to do those things that you can see there on the screen, to make research evidence accessible, applicable, and hopefully actionable where it matters. We work with and for the Education Endowment Foundation, and we help them to support their primary objective, which is to improve academic outcomes for disadvantaged pupils between the ages of 2 and 19, so quite a big spread. So they do this by supporting the use of research evidence across the whole system. So they basically power us as the Research School Network. They produce these guidance reports, which are incredibly useful, free to access. There are lots there on the screen, but there are lots more. So they cover a plethora of themes from behaviour, maths, science, social and emotional learning. So just to flag those up and to signpost them. The most recent one that's been updated is the Teaching Assistant Guidance Report. This supports schools to carefully and strategically deploy teaching assistants so that all pupils, regardless of their background, are given the right support to achieve and thrive. Again, that's free to download. And if you like what you see today, please watch this space because that's going to be an area of focus for Townend Research School next academic year. We've got some online work in the pipeline around teaching assistants. Again, another signpost just to these clips from the classroom, which, they're videos, a collection of videos that capture classroom practice. They cover a range of themes, again, like the guidance reports. They can be used as a helpful watch if you're considering implementing something similar at school. They offer pause points and reflections and signposts to further reading, etc. They can be used in team meetings, staff twilights, as part of your PD programme. We're going to be doing one on modelling in writing, and hopefully that'll be available next half term. Another quick signpost, and we will be referring back to this today, is the new-ish Early Years Toolkit and Evidence Store. There's a whole shop front on the store that looks at self-regulation and executive function. So each of the elements that you can see there presents the evidence, some teaching techniques, and then most importantly, some really amazing video clips of real practitioners delivering to real children. They're invaluable, because all pupils were in early years at one point, so they're not just for early years educators, but for us all to see the starting point. And I will keep alluding to this as we go through, that later behaviours often have early beginnings. How we begin shapes who we become. So all the way through this, we'll see the importance of early years. So there's also the EF metacognition and self-regulated guidance report. So again, I'm just signposting to that for future reading because it links quite nicely with what we're doing today. And then likewise, the social and emotional learning one. It does say primary schools on there, but it is, relevant for teenagers too. So we've already met 4 quite substantial terms, the ones that you can see there on the screen. So I think it's really quite useful to clarify these 4 concepts to start with. So they are all interconnected and they contribute to that overall goal of achieving, of learning, of thriving. So at the core are executive functions. These are the foundational sort of mental toolbox of cognitive skills that help us plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, and juggle lots of different tasks. And there are 3 core components to our executive function. So working memory, which is how we hold and use information mentally. Cognitive flexibility, which is our ability to shift attention or adapt to new demands. And then inhibitory control, so resisting impulses, staying focused and having that self-discipline. Building on this, we have metacognition, which is our awareness and our management of these thinking skills. They allow us to understand and control our cognitive processes. Then we have self-regulation. This emerges as a broader ability to manage our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviours. It's essentially the behaviour toolbox that applies those cognitive and metacognitive abilities. And then finally, we have self-regulated learning. So that's just the specific application of that entire system to the learning process. And it involves planning, monitoring, and adapting our learning strategies. So hopefully that visual there effectively shows how each concept builds upon and encompasses the other. But this is where we're going to be putting most of our focus today. The other elements will naturally intertwine and I will signpost them as we go. So this is what we're going to cover today. Roughly an hour or so. So it's not going to be an interactive session. There will be some pause points for you to reflect, but unfortunately, mainly it's just me talking at you, sorry. And so please feel free to use the chat function and I'll stop the recording at the end for questions. But because time is tight and I'm covering loads of really rather meaty areas, as we've said, the signpost that you're going to see here will let you know where there are free resources to access further reading. So please watch out for that little sign. Okay, so to begin, just some brain facts about development in the first 5 years, and I'll just let you read these. So the human brain is amazing. Early brain development, as I will keep going on about today, has a lasting impact on a person's ability to learn, to communicate, and to succeed in school and in later life. The early years are when connections are formed and connections that are essential for skills like motivation, self-regulation, problem solving, and communication. And if these connections aren't made early on, they're much harder to develop. So from birth, children develop connections through everyday experiences, and these are shaped with parents and caregivers and sensory engagement with the world around them. So daily experiences determine which connections form and endure, meaning that the quality of care and stimulation and interaction are crucial. So positive experiences help build healthy neural connections for skills like communication. Those healthy connections will endure. But on the flip side, negative experiences can do the opposite, and these will endure as well. So like I've said, later behaviours often have early beginnings. How we begin shapes who we become. So right from the start, even before they're born, every moment spent interacting with a child builds their brain. So every chat, song with the baby bump, and then, beyond birth, the smiles, the cuddles, the games, the books that you share, um, helps children to develop confidence, to learn, to communicate, and to form relationships. And we're going to discover this as we go through. Caring, responsive relationships are crucial to brain development. So loving, dependable relationships, first of all, starting at home with family, then extending to caregivers, to teachers, to peers, and the wider community are essential for healthy growth. Right, so we're going to look at brain development now in the first 25 years. And pardon the pun, but I'm sure this will blow your mind because it did mine. So the prefrontal cortex is the brain's control center for executive function skills, like impulse control, understanding consequences, and decision making. And this is actually the very last part of the brain to fully develop, and it often doesn't reach maturity, like full maturity, until around age 25. So age 25. So it explains why children, teens, and young adults may struggle with decision making. It's not their fault. The brain processes feelings first and logical reasoning develops later. And it's actually really scary to think how many life-changing decisions, I took before I was 25, decisions led by emotions and not logic. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. So now for the sort of science bit. Neuroscience reveals that we learn much more effectively when we're experiencing positive emotions. So learning and emotions are deeply intertwined. How you respond to and experience trauma and stress and how you function as a person in society can all be explained by the triune brain. Tri equals 3, so there are 3 parts to it. So the first part of the brain to develop is the brainstem. And this is often referred to as the survival brain. And it's the only part of our brains that is fully developed at birth. It's also referred to as the reptilian brain as well. It's also the innermost part of the brain. And it's the part of the brain that's connected with safety. So it's responsible basically for keeping us alive by managing the essential automatic processes that sustain life without us consciously thinking about it. So heart rate, breathing, reflexes. Inconsistent and chaotic environments can lead to an oversensitized lower brain in young people, which heightens their stress responses. It sticks around, it endures through life. So for better or worse, a child's social, emotional, and cognitive development is heavily influenced by those early childhood experiences. So as I keep saying, how we begin shapes who we become. So the second part of the brain to develop is the limbic system, which is often called the emotional brain. And this area plays a key role in controlling emotions and motivation. So it drives our emotional responses, our instincts, and it guides us towards actions that fulfill our basic needs and social connections. So it explains why animals innately stay in herds or pods or tribes, and it's sometimes called the mammalian brain, if I pronounce that correctly. So this part is chiefly concerned with connection and relationships. The human brain is inherently social. It's shaped and wired by the experiences, the interactions, the relationships that we encounter throughout life. They leave their mark. So although we're born with billions of brain cells, the connections between them are sparse at birth, and the neural connections develop and strengthen over time. And this is largely influenced by our interactions with others. So how children are responded to and engaged with early on, so for good or for bad, plays a crucial role in brain development, emotional growth, and it significantly impacts their cognitive and social abilities as they mature. And then the third part of the triune brain to develop is that prefrontal cortex there, and it doesn't fully develop, as we looked at, until the age of 25, often referred to as the thinking brain. So this region is responsible for higher level functions like language, abstract thinking, planning, and it enables us to organize our thoughts, track sequences of events, and to understand time. And this part of the brain is widely considered the the control center for our executive functions. So just to dig a bit deeper, its main concern is problem solving and learning. It's our rational brain. So this prefrontal cortex also allows us to communicate and interact effectively with others and make decisions. So for a child to engage in learning, this cortex must be active, and it only happens when they feel genuinely safe. So if the nervous system is dysregulated, that cortex becomes inaccessible and it hinders the learning process and that person's ability to communicate and think rationally. So all the things that you can see there on the screen sort of go out of the window, and we'll come to windows later. So those three parts always function as a whole. They're interdependent. So big emotions like fear, anger, rejection, disappointed are detected by the amygdala, or the fear center of our brains, as a danger. So it shuts down the thinking brain and sends a distress signal to our survival brain. So this triggers adrenaline, cortisol release, and a stress response. So we'll go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode, where we might become, for example, aggressive, defiant, withdrawn, or submissive. So neurologically, the amygdala response has the effect of hijacking that cortex and shutting it down. So we go into a state of survival brain. And so it explains why we can't think straight, hold conversations, or be rational when we're experiencing those big emotions. And a brain cannot learn if it's stressed or afraid. So just a bit more about the amygdala. It's responsible for everything linked to emotions, and research shows that it plays a role in things like mood disorders. So for example, major depressive disorder. The amygdala is linked to both emotional memories and our current emotions. So it helps store vivid, detailed memories of important or emotional events from the past, known as flashbulb memories. So these are the moments that stay with us, like when you vividly recall where you were during a major life event or a highly emotional experience, so both good or bad, so weddings, funerals, things like that. They don't go away. They get triggered down the track, a smell, a song. So when we perceive a threat, and each individual person will have different stresses and different windows of tolerance. So, fear of spiders, dogs, the smell of alcohol, raised voices, that amygdala will kick in to activate the body's stress responses. So these responses work through our autonomic nervous system. So fight. So if we're in this mode, we might feel the need to use our hands, feet, or our voices to fight off the danger that we're perceiving. As a result, we might see aggressive, defensive, argumentative behaviour. Flight, we feel the need to get away from whatever it is that's making us feel in danger. So we might run, we might hide, we might see avoidance, unfocused or restless behaviour or communication. Freeze, our body doesn't do what we want it to. We might be unable to speak or move. We want to be alone. We might refuse to follow instructions. So we might see a child becoming withdrawn, shut down, inactive. So there may be no verbal communication. And then fawn. So we need to be with somebody we feel safe with. We seek reassurances. We might be overly apologetic, feel scared to sort of voice what we really think or what we really want. And we might see submissive behaviour or overcompensating. So we're just going to have a pause point here to just take in everything that we've covered so far. So just to think about the stress responses of some of the children in your care that you work with, which ones respond in which ways to perceived threats and big emotions? So just 60 seconds just to think. So when we're in any of these states, learning, decision making, rational communication, and reasoning go out of the window. And I did promise you windows earlier. So we all develop one known as a window of tolerance, which is our capacity to handle stress. When a person's within their window of tolerance, they're at their optimal state, they're calm, they're alert, safe, regulated, and we're in control. They can think clearly, engage in learning, show love, be playful, understand and empathize with others. However, stressful situations can narrow this window, which makes it harder for us to stay calm and focused. So different triggers can push us outside this window, leading to two distinct states. So I like to simplify them as up and down. So we've got hyper arousal, which is up, we're up a height, or overreactive. So in this state, heart rate, breathing accelerates, leads to feelings of anxiety, overwhelm, fear, or the feeling that we're out of control. So these big emotions may manifest as anger, aggression, or the urge to flee. So usually associated with fight or flight. The second state is hypoarousal, so down in the dumps, or underreactive. So here the body slows down, it's in a lethargic state, there's a decrease in heart rate, energy levels, we may go into freeze or fawn mode. And this state can result in big feelings of emptiness, flatness, numbness, or low mood. We might want to withdraw. So when the nervous system is dysregulated, it can feel like you're battling your own body, making it harder still to stay within that window of tolerance. So being pushed up a height or down into the dumps. And adults play a crucial role in helping children to develop their window of tolerance. So as we've said, the early years are crucial for developing that brain resilience and our healthy responses to stress. So as we said, what happens in those early years, whether supportive or stressful, shapes how children manage challenges throughout their lives. So even in adolescence and beyond, the effects of early stress can endure, and it can influence behaviour, learning, and emotional well-being. So for teachers or parents of older pupils, understanding this helps us to explain why some behaviours and difficulties persist in pupils. So an individual, whether a child or an adult exposed to excessive stress during the early years, may develop a sensitised alarm system. So as a result, even relatively minor stresses such as a strong smell, a door slammed, raised voices can trigger a heightened fight, flight, freeze or fawn response. High levels of stress hormones actually weaken that thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, while strengthening areas involved in emotions, so the amygdala. And during the early years, the brain forms patterns for how it reacts to stress. It consolidates memories of trauma, and emotional responses become learnt responses. So as a result, flashbulb memories can be stored more strongly, and emotional responses become conditioned, and the body's stress reactions are heightened. And then there's a brand new study, hot off the press, as you can see the date there, that supports what I've just said about early life experiences shaping brain development. And it looks especially at the white brain matter that helps different parts of the brain communicate. So strong white brain matter is linked to skills like reading, speaking, and maths. So researchers looked at data from thousands of children and found that nearly every experience they studied had some impact on brain development. And it found that two of the biggest risks were going through trauma and social vulnerability. So living in challenging conditions like unsafe housing or poverty. So these factors were linked to weaker white brain matter, which in turn was linked to learning difficulties later on. The study found that certain protective factors were linked to stronger brain development in children, especially better white matter, the quality of it. So these included living in a two-parent household, having a higher family income, receiving loving and kind parenting, and living in a safe, trusting community. So for us as educators, the key takeaway is that creating that safe, supportive, and inclusive classroom, and working with families can help protect and support pupils facing adversity. So whilst we can't shield children from ACEs, otherwise known as adverse childhood experiences, or from danger or trauma, we can, however, teach them how to self-regulate when emotions become too big. So we can support children by taking a bottom-up approach to regulation. So first, we must regulate the survival brain and widen that window. Our focus needs to be on calming the body first. It's important to help children use different self-regulation strategies, which we'll look at later. So these have to involve breathing, movement, or touch. And these can help regulate their autonomic nervous system, release that stored stress and cortisol, and restore balance in their body. Second, we relate to that emotional brain. So building connections and relationships is really crucial for emotional regulation and social support. So instead of sort of controlling or ignoring or trivializing children's feelings by telling them to stop being angry or, don't cry, we should really be helping them to understand and process their emotions, because suppressing feelings can harm both mental well-being and physical health. And it's quite stark, really, and we're going to look at that right towards the end. So during this stage, we can help them to see that there's no such thing as a bad emotion, that all emotions are normal and natural, we all feel them. Key message to share is that whilst it's okay to, perfectly okay to have and to talk about our feelings, it's not always okay to act on them, especially when it comes to things like anger. So we should encourage children to manage their behaviour rather than suppress their feelings. So when we help children to regulate these big emotions and feel loved and cared for. Engaging with others, sharing feelings, and fostering supportive relationships can help children feel safe and understood. And this can positively impact the autonomic nervous system by creating that sense of security and calm. And it's only then that they're going to be ready to talk, participate, and interact. So feelings will always trump thinking. Finally, we can reason with that thinking brain. So we can discuss what can be learnt from what's happened. This step involves using cognitive processes to understand and make sense of experiences and feelings. So this is where we can encourage reflective thinking and problem solving and help children to interpret their emotional responses, which allows for more effective coping strategies and regulation. So this may involve discussing situations, recognizing particular patterns or triggers, and then reframing their thoughts to promote a healthier response to any stresses. So it's important, really important to remember not to focus on that cortex right away. Instead, we need to help regulate the lower parts of the brain, which do become oversensitive during stressful situations. So as I've said, we can't reason, communicate, or think effectively when our emotions aren't under control. So feelings first, talking later, emotions lead, and logic follows. So when we're dysregulated, communication and learning become challenging. So our ability to process information, stay focused, is compromised. And like I said, in education, our core purpose, our goal, our business is learning, thriving, achieving. That's our North Star. That's the whole point of school, isn't it? To learn stuff. And fortunately, there is a science for learning stuff, cognitive science, which you can see there. So we have to make sure that what we teach them sticks. We need children to know more and remember more. And this is a review of cognitive science, and it's on the EF's website. So we're going to dip briefly into cognitive science now, but we're briefly just going to come back to this. So I said earlier that executive functions are that foundational mental toolbox of our cognitive skills, and they consist of working memory, cognitive flexibility, inhibitory control. And having strong executive functions enables that metacognition, which in turn supports self-regulation, and then self-regulated learning is that application of all of them. It's the icing on the cake across the learning context. So these all come into play in the diagram here that we can see. It's a learning model, and It's on page 10 from that document that I just mentioned. So success in school hinges on knowing more and remembering more, and learning is remembering. So just to go through the model, memory can be separated out into sensory, working, and long-term memory. So the process of going from seeing or hearing something new, so that new information that we want them to learn, the input, to storing it in your long-term memory has to go through several stages. So first, there's that input. So here it is. The vast majority of this will be forgotten or filtered by where our attention is focused. So, for example, the background noise, disruption, distractions, feeling hungry, somebody else's clothes, what's on the wall. These things may swamp the sensory memory, meaning that there's a deficit in attention. Children aren't thinking hard about what we want them to think hard about. Our senses are constantly bombarded by stimuli, sight, sound, smell, balance, temperature, if we're feeling pain, and then internal signals like hunger. The brain's attention system filters all of this input and it decides what to focus on, what's important to focus on. And our attention is limited, and distractions can make us miss things. Noisy environments require more effort to focus. Our attention also fades over time and needs effort to maintain it. So those quotes there, learning isn't free, you have to pay attention. So only a small fraction of the information we attend to enters our working memory. So just back to that diagram. So that working memory is where we think, speak, listen, and process new information. And it plays a key role in understanding language, reasoning, and connecting new knowledge to what we already know. So children must juggle new information, recall prior knowledge, and follow adult instruction. So all of which add to their cognitive load. So it used to be thought that the working memory could hold up to 7 items, but MRIs now show that it's more likely to be 4 to 5 items. And these pieces of information only sort of stick around for 18 to 30 seconds unless we do something with them, such as thinking deeply, discussing, applying, or rehearsing them. So it applies to both adults and children too, because we all learn in the same way. So for information to go into that long-term memory, it's got to be attended to, thought about deeply, discussed and retrieved, and then rehearsed and linked to prior knowledge. Once we can apply it across different contexts, transfer, we can say it's been learned. And this is where self-regulation comes in. So that little brief whistle-stop tour of how we learn, the ultimate thing is learning isn't free. We have to pay attention. So pupils who can self-regulate and are better at ignoring distractions and staying on task are going to learn more. So we're just going to have a bit of a pause point here to think about what we've looked at so far and how it all fits together. So we'll just take 60 seconds. Very well, that probably wasn't long enough. But in the interest of time, just to signpost again, this book by Julian Grenier, it's aimed at early years, but it's applicable to all. It has a whole section on self-regulation and executive function, and I'll just let you read the quotes on the screen. Okay, so self-regulation needs to be taught. So the next section of this evening, we're going to be looking at how to do just that. Okay, so I'm just going to let you read again this quote from the Early Years Evidence Store. So according to the evidence store, there are believed to be 5 domains of self-regulation. So cognitive, emotional, pro-social, social, and biological. And some of us may be really good at cognitive and behavioral self-regulation, but not so good at emotional. So we're just going to take a quick walk through each of these areas and what the possible stresses are, and then how we might reduce them. So the first one is the biological domain. So this is managing physical and physiological responses. So some of the stresses that impact this domain can be fatigue or lack of sleep, hunger, poor nutrition, feeling poorly, or having that physical discomfort, and then sensory sensitivities. So things like noises, smells, or being sensitive to temperature. And then on the right-hand side are some things that we can do to help children regulate this in this domain. Next one is the cognitive, which is where we manage thinking and attention. Some stresses that can impact on this are things like if we set overly complex tasks that exceed the child's developmental level, lack of structure or unclear instructions, sudden changes in routines or schedules, asking them to multitask or expecting them to focus on too many things at once. And then some of the things that we can do are there in the blue box. Then we have the pro-social domain. So this is empathy and cooperation. Some of the stresses are when children find it difficult sharing or taking turns. There might be conflict with their peers over toys, equipment, or adult attention. Lack of guidance on being able to manage their feelings, feelings of empathy or fairness. And then sometimes it's overwhelming group dynamics. So there's too many children there at once. And so there are some things likewise that support us to regulate this domain. In the social domain, which is obviously interacting with others, some of the stresses can be navigating unfamiliar situations or environments. So starting a new class at school or a new school, misunderstanding social cues. So for example, not recognizing when others are upset, being excluded or rejected from their peer groups and from their friendship groups, changes in caregivers or teachers. And again, there are some things there that we can support regulation of that domain. And then finally, that emotional domain, which is managing emotions. And then some of the stresses here could be separation from their parents, caregivers, overstimulation to things like loud noises, bright lights, when they're feeling fear or anxiety due to unfamiliar situations, and then inconsistent or unpredictable emotional responses from adults. And we will look at this as we go through as well. This is woven through. So again, there are some things that we can do to support this. And you can see there that spot, scan, select and solve, that's coming up now when we look at a routine for teaching self-regulation. So back to the EEF. This is from the Early Years Toolkit. I'll give you a moment just to read it. And then there's another quote there from the Evidence Store. In a nutshell, it's a child's ability to regulate is supported by responsive interactions with others, namely the caregivers, because these play a key role. Siblings and peers also do contribute, but not so much as the adults. So let's look at a routine now to teach these self-regulation skills. So to help children, teenagers and adults, ourselves, to self-regulate, it's useful to create a shared language, a routine or a system to deal with thoughts and feelings. So spot, scan, select and solve can be a useful tool. It's important that both adults and children follow the steps. Adults model, verbalize, act out the steps so that children can learn from them and see the approach in action. So all of the resources that I'm about to talk through can be found for free on our website. So step one is spot. And this is where we're just identifying that we're feeling something and we're giving it a name. So it's all about developing a rich language of emotions. So in the early stages, it's better to introduce fewer emotions and then let them become familiar with them. And then as the child develops the language and the understanding, there are lots of opportunities to develop this vocabulary. So for example, synonym spectrum activities, which again, you can find a guide to these on our website. So this looks at different intensities or degrees or scales or sizes to our feelings. When children are really young, it might be worth introducing the idea of shades of feelings by using something like a colour chart that you can get from DIY stores. I won't name one. So let's take anger, for instance. Are they just a little bit angry? Are they quite angry? Or, are they very angry? So that sort of introduces that scale of feeling. So it supports them to understand that feelings have different sizes. If we're feeling, if it's a little feeling, we will probably deal with it very differently than if it's a big feeling, and we'll look at that later. For older children, these feeling wheels layer in sort of more of those shades of intensity vocabulary, and then they don't have the pictures. So that developing that language of emotions matters. So I'll just let you read what it says there. So the next step is scan. And this is when we scan our bodies for cues or signals. It's where children learn to understand how the emotions make their bodies behave, the physical manifestations of the feelings in their body. So we're going to go back to the biology lesson briefly. This diagram shows the stress response in the body. So remember that amygdala? So that detects the danger, and it signals the brain to release a hormone from the pituitary gland. This stimulates the adrenal glands, which are sort of right by our kidneys, to release cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones enter the bloodstream and basically play havoc. They cause physical changes such as sweating, increased heart rate, dilated pupils, slowed digestion, all the things that you can see there. So it has a physical manifestation in the body. So this is what might happen during that stress response. So for example, oxygen gets diverted away from the thinking brain, which is why we find it hard to think straight or make choices. There's a physiological reason for that. Our muscles tense to prepare for fight or flight. It can make us shake, it can make us fidget. The digestive system actually shuts down, so the body can prioritize survival. The body limits the blood flow to the stomach, so digestive muscles actually contract. And I'm sure we've all been there, and that classic butterflies in the tummy feeling, or worse, that desperate dash to the toilet, to the bathroom when we're nervous or scared. It's actually our body's physical reaction. It's its response to fear. So when your body senses danger, that biology kicks in. So we can teach children to scan for these body signals. And so here's some examples. So when I'm feeling worried, my brain might feel like I can't stop thinking, and my tummy feels a bit like a washing machine. It goes round and round. When I'm angry, my brain might feel really busy, like the thoughts are racing around. My face might feel hot, and I might clench my fists together. It's also really important to notice and appreciate the positive feelings too, because when we're dysregulated, this is what we're aiming for, isn't it? To get back to those positive feelings. So by noticing their own unique stress response for each feeling, children can make more sense of it all, and they can begin to self-regulate. So the body signal gives them the clue that they need to change something if it feels negative, or keep doing something if it feels positive. So then we have step 3, which is select. And this is where we select a self-regulation tool that helps us to deal with how we're feeling, to widen that window of tolerance. It's a way of promoting self-care, a way of looking after protecting ourselves and others when we're experiencing big feelings. So self-regulation techniques often involve breathing, movement, or touch. These help us to regulate the nervous system. So they're going to be unique for each child and for each feeling that they experience. So through trial and error, they find and then use the tool that will help them to reach that goal of joining back in or feeling calm. So the poster has some suggestions. Some children may find doing really high energy things like having a run around or bouncing a ball effective if they're hyper aroused, so up a height. Some may find lower energy things like taking a drink of water or a hug sorts them out if they're hypo aroused, so down in the dumps. So these tools will need to be personalised to fit the intensity of the emotion as well. So that's why teaching those little and big feelings is important. So if they're only feeling a little bit angry, then counting to 20, cuddling a toy, doing some deep breathing might suffice. But if they're very angry, a big emotion, then they may need to take time out in the teepee, splash cold water on their face, or take a bounce on the trampoline or something like that. So as you can see, the techniques all involve either breathing, movement, or touch, because these help to aid regulation of the nervous system. And then just to quickly signpost back to that book, these are the abilities that children acquire when they can self-regulate. It helps them to become resilient. And then we have step 4, which is to solve the problem, to find a solution. So once that survival brain is calmed through that bottom-up approach, the thinking brain can be engaged. So we deal with how we feel first and talk later. So this is when we can help the child to understand what happened, guide them to express their feelings constructively, make a plan for what to do next time, work together to find a solution, or find a way to make amends if their behaviour has impacted someone else. So the adult modelling of this routine in everyday situations and with interactions with children is really important to help it become a norm and established. And it also helps us as adults to be better at self-regulating, to actually take the time to do it, because let's face it, we all need to, because life is so stressful. So it helps us to know ourselves, know our triggers, know our body cues, and know our remedies. So there's a teaching sequence available on our website, because we're not born with these skills. They can be caught through observation and interaction as children experience those warm, nurturing relationships, but they also need to be explicitly taught. So taught and caught. So that's just on our website. And then adults can support and promote the development of self-regulation across different contexts. So I'll just let you read. Those positive relationships between everybody absolutely matters. And then just on the evidence store, it suggests that co-regulation has two parts. And I've just adapted the descriptions to show how spot, scan, select and solve can fit in each. So I'll just let you read both of those. So we're just going to walk through an example of co-regulation now. So it's lunchtime, group of pupils playing football on the school field. A team has been picked, but Amir feels left out of the starting line. So he insists that he always gets overlooked, and in frustration, he storms onto the pitch mid-game, kicks the ball and shouts at his friends. So he's out of his window of tolerance. He's feeling rejected, humiliated and angry. So this is how an adult might help. So they see what's happening and they can step in to co-regulate. So they might speak to Amir in a calm, respectful tone, offering space, but also support. So they acknowledge and empathize with his emotions. You know, it looks like you're feeling left out, fed up, and that must be hard. That might help Amir to feel understood. The adult might then work with him to spot and name how he's feeling. And at this stage, it's that feelings trump thinking. So next, the adult might prompt Amir to scan for physical signs of escalation. So I can see you're breathing fast, your fists are clenched tight. That's your body telling you that things are getting intense. So still no reasoning at this point. We're just letting his brain settle. So feelings first, talk later. The adult might then help him select a self-regulation strategy. So, let's walk a lap of the field while you cool off. Just, take a breather. These help him move from fight or flight into a more regulated state. So those emotions lead and then logic follows. So once he's calmer, the adult can gently support and reflection, and they might help him solve the issue, both in the short term and then in the longer term too. So things like, why did that happen? What could you do differently next time? How could you make amends with your friends? How might we solve the problem in future so this doesn't happen again? So by stepping in with that warmth and guidance, the adult is supporting Amir to learn how to handle those strong emotions in real life social situations. So over time, hopefully, he'll be more able to notice his feelings early, choose a helpful strategy, and then speak up for himself in a more constructive way. And we've got to remember too that we're also dealing with that with a prefrontal cortex that isn't fully mature. Children and teens often rely more on that emotional part of their brain rather than the thinking or rational part. It makes them more likely to act impulsively or emotionally rather than rationally. So I'm sure we can all relate to that in our dealings with young people. Those feelings trump thinking, regulation before reasoning and reflection. So just really briefly back to this. Let's go back to Amir when he's in the middle of that big emotion like frustration. Trying to jump in and reason with his thinking brain straight away was never going to work because he literally can't think straight in that moment. His brain is in survival mode, not that sort of let's have a calm, logical chat mode. And we've all been there trying to reason with anybody, let alone a teenager, in the middle of a meltdown, a confrontation or a moment of high stress. It rarely ends well. So telling an overwhelmed adolescent to calm down or use their words can feel like lighting a match in a storm. It's ineffective. And then shouting at a dysregulated pupil, raising your voice and doling out sanctions sort of when they're in that state is like throwing fuel on the fire. That real reflection only comes when their nervous system feels safe again. And the same goes for us. When our own stress levels are high, which they are in times of conflict, we're more likely to react rather than respond. A calm adult can calm a child, but a dysregulated adult can escalate the situation. Mentioning a consequence too early while emotions are still raging, often fans the flames instead of restoring order. So we need to damp the fire for both of us, then help them to make sense of it. So only then can you talk honestly about what happened, what needs repairing, and then what consequence is fair and necessary. And this absolutely isn't about letting things slide or ignoring poor behaviour. It's just about timing. They need to be ready to hear it, reflect on it, and learn from it. So dealing with the feelings, then dealing with the facts. I promised this before, but what we really don't want to do is kids suppressing emotions, because this can actually harm both mental and physical health. When cortisol levels stay too high for too long in our body, it can cause what you can see there. And there's more, it can cause this too. Hopefully, it highlights how fostering self-regulation skills sort of early on helps build resilience and equips children with the tools that they need to manage stress in healthy ways, which can lead to more balanced emotional development. So that spot, scan, select, and solve approach supports both emotional well-being and long-term physical health. And then I was going to do a pause point, but I'm very conscious of time. Our ability to self-regulate can really have an impact, as we've just looked at, on the children that we care for. So that spot, scan, select, and solve framework means that we, adults and children, make space and time to develop those important habits. And if we're doing those co-regulation strategies, it benefits both the adults and the children. What's good for the kids is good for the grown-ups too. So that ability to take care of ourselves matters a lot, because our ability to regulate matters. Our well-being is fundamental to high quality teaching and learning and building relationships. And all humans rely and thrive on strong, consistent relationships. They're good for us, they're transformative. So relationships protect us when things are difficult and help us to become resilient. Neuroscience shows that young people with supportive relationships and that sense of belonging and strong social connections tend to be happier, more engaged, and more successful in educational settings. So these relational factors contribute significantly to their overall well-being and ability to thrive. So relationships make us more resilient to the stresses, by providing us with the experiences that you can see there on the screen, feeling safe, healthy, active, and so on. So self-regulation really matters, and so does relationships. So social emotional health in early childhood is defined as the child's developing capacity to form secure relationships, experience and regulate emotions, to explore and learn. And without these capacities, humans cannot successfully participate in social interactions. They find it hard to manage conflict, form intimate connections, express empathy, or develop a positive identity. So back to this, come full circle. If we want all pupils to thrive and achieve, we must meet them where they are, not just academically, but biologically. So understanding how the brain works helps us to respond with empathy, structure, and support so that every child can manage emotions, stay engaged, and be ready to learn. So self-regulation isn't a nice to have, it's the foundation for thinking, for communicating, and for flourishing in school and beyond. So just a few notes before we close. So just to let you know that our next blog, which is due out next week, it's a 3-part collaboration with the other research schools in the Northeast, deals with some of the themes that we've looked at today. So you can see there on the screen, the first one's about executive functioning. It's all to do with writing, but it covers some of the things that we've looked at today. So there's the QR code, it's there again. So if you're interested in seeing what we do in future, here are all our contact details. If you would like everything directly to your inbox, please do use that QR code to sign up to our newsletter. But here we are at the end, and I'm sorry that I'm a few minutes over. I hope that you found the session useful. Really appreciate it. If you do have any key takeaways, to pop in the chat. I'll be adding the recording to our YouTube channel, as I'm very aware that this was a lot to take in. So if you wish to go back and watch it and pause, it's available to you there. But thank you basically for coming, and have a lovely rest of your day. I'm going to stop the recording now if anyone wants to hang on, answer any questions. If not, thank you very much.